This is my honest review of the book Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. Hi, I'm Brittany. I am a mother of 4. 2 of them are in school and I homeschool them. I have a 5-year-old in kindergarten and I have a 10-year-old in 5th grade. And this is the first time I'm teaching reading because my oldest was actually in school when she learned how to read, and then I pulled her out of school and we started homeschooling. So by the time I got her, she was already reading. So this is my first experience teaching my child to read at home versus in preschool and kindergarten and just being the supplemental teacher. So I had heard of this book. One of my friends gave me this book to borrow, and then I ended up just buying it because my kids keep writing in it. But this is Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. It's by Siegfried Engelmann and Phyllis Haydox and Elaine Bruner. And the philosophy of this program is instead of learning letters like M or S or B, they learn sounds. What do the letters sound like? Because when you're reading, you don't say the sound, the letter, you say the sound. So an M would be an S would be S, and a B would be B. It makes sense, right? So I really like this. What it says it kind of goes over, what are the sounds? How do you say the sounds? So as a teacher, you know what you're doing. It does not tell you when to start this program. So it doesn't say if your child is at this maturity level or if they're, recognizing numbers or letters. It just says use this as your starting point. So I did, and I tried this with my 4 years. My kindergartner at the time was 4 when I started this program, and we did about 10 lessons, and immediately I was like, she's just not ready for this. She was doing pretty well for the first few lessons, and then she just didn't have the patience for it. So I thought, okay, we'll wait until next year. So next year came, and now we're in kindergarten. And we started the program this year, restarted it. I didn't just pick up where I left off. I restarted it to make sure she remembered what we had done. And it starts off pretty easy. So it starts off with just a couple of sounds, like this is the sound, and this is the s sound. And it talks about rhyming, like rhyme with at, mat, sat, right? So it teaches them pattern recognition. It teaches them sounds, and it doesn't teach them the letters yet, right? Which I think is interesting because some people will ask my 5-year-old, what letter is that? And she'll say, and they're like, no, that's an M. And she's like, I know, it's a sound, right? We'll get there. At the end is when they start saying, okay, now we're going to label the letters, right? But in the beginning with this book, it's just sounds, which actually works really well. Okay, so back into the book, the first 10 or so lessons is just getting some basic sounds like e, t, s, a, right? So you can start making words. So all of a sudden around lesson 10 is when you start getting words like sat. And it doesn't teach sat, it teaches the continuation of the sound sat, because it's easier to hear sat, than sat, and kids don't put the sounds together. So I really like that. So she was doing really well for like the first 20 or so lessons. And then around lesson 20, it starts putting the words that they've been able to sound out together into short stories. And then there's a little picture that goes with it. Great, she was doing awesome. See the ram sit, right? The ram sit. And then it asks comprehension questions like, what's the ram doing? He's sitting. Who's sitting? The ram, right? So that I really liked. And then it just added some more and more sounds and more words. And then around lesson 30, the stories got a little bit longer. And when they got to be about this long is when my 5-year-old started getting a little more hesitant to read. And it's not because she couldn't read it. It was because all of a sudden it looked like a lot. And it is a lot for a 5-year-old on one page to read all of these words. If it had been split, this sentence on one page, and then the next sentence on the next page, and then the next sentence on the next page with pictures in between, I think that would have been a lot more helpful for a 5-year-old. But, around lesson 30, she was still hanging on, and we were doing okay. She was getting a little more hesitant, but we were doing okay. And then around lesson 40, it started getting more. And the first thing she would do is count how many lines she had to read. This one has 5 lines. She would say, that's too many. I don't want to do that. And I said, just read the first line. and then she'd overwhelmingly read it because she's like, oh, I know there's 4 more lines after that, right? So the best news was that she was reading it. She can read this. The bad news, I guess, is she was starting to get very overwhelmed. So that was around lesson 40s. And then around lesson 50, it started getting longer. And it started looking like actual pages in a book. Not a kindergartner book, but like a 3rd grade book, right? And she'd look at that, count her lines, and say, I'm not doing that. She could. So we would sit down, and it says that it's supposed to be 20 minutes. But when we got to these lessons, this alone took 20 minutes, and you're supposed to read it twice. The first time is just a run through. The second time is the comprehension. Okay, now that you've read it once, let's read it again, and I'll ask you questions. What did he say? Well, what did she say? And then what happened? Which is really good, and she was answering the questions. But when we got to lessons 50 or 60, it turned into a battle. It turned into a crying match. It was, I don't want to do it. I'm not grabbing my book. I don't want to do school anymore. I hate school. I don't want to do this. I'm not blaming the book. I just think that she's not quite mature enough to sit down and read this. And as a 5-year-old, it's extremely overwhelming. This was her lesson 2 days ago. This is extremely daunting for a 5-year-old to read when the only reward is a tiny picture. Again, if it had said hunting for a deer on one page, and then it said an old man got on his coat for a walk on another page, I feel like that would have been more friendly for a kindergartner. This book I feel like is a little too advanced for kindergarten, though it's kindergarten that we're pushing reading. So here we are today. She read her story today, and the words are getting smaller because they're trying to get her used to novels and books. But it's not getting easier. Every single day is turning into a battle. And as a mom and a teacher, I want to grow her in her learning. I want her to desire to learn. I want her to love reading. If you don't love reading, you're not going to read. And right now, she really doesn't like reading. Like, I would probably use the H word. She hates reading. And it's because I'm overwhelming her with this book. And again, it's not the book. I think it's because she's just a different maturity level than some other 5-year-olds. And there might be 5-year-olds who are like, this book's amazing. They're building confidence. They have, they can read this entire story in like 3 minutes and it makes them feel really good. But I think there's going to be other kids like my kid who's just overwhelmed. She can. She just doesn't want to. It's just too much. So what I'm going to do now is put this book down. And we got to lesson 67, so we're about 2/3 of the way through. And I'm going to start doing other books. I'm going to start doing more picture books, See Spot Run, those kinds of things, Hop on Pop, which she can read. And it's not as daunting because there's only 5 words on a page or 10 words on a page. There's not 70 words on a page. So that's my honest review. It's working. This book really works. But 20 minutes is not right, where it says it somewhere around here. Learn to read in just 20 minutes a day. That's not right for at least my child. And it's just not helping her with her desire to read. So thanks for listening. Hopefully this book works for you. It might. It's worth a try. But if it doesn't, don't feel discouraged. Just put it down and try a different avenue. That's my honest review. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to do a lot of honest reviews of different curriculum that I use in my homeschooling years. There are some things that I absolutely love and some things that I absolutely hate and some things that are kind of right in the middle. This one for me is like a love-hate, right? Like my 5-year-old is reading, but she doesn't like to. So it's a love-hate relationship for this one. If you're interested in more reviews or anything else homeschool related, follow me, subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.